Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I am with you today as we are speaking with one of our guests on the program. We always enjoy speaking to politicians and candidates who will be affecting your life. And that's why we have the opportunity today to be speaking with a Mr. Thomas Queter, who has been a libertarian. He has been a candidate for the New York 52nd District and may well be again. We're going to find out for sure. But this is part of our effort to make sure that you are notified of everyone who is involved in the elections that affect your life and making sure that we share in this experiment, this expression of the First Amendment. So without further ado, as you can see on the screen, we have Mr. Thomas Queter. And I should mention, for full disclosure, before you mention anything, Tom, I have met and spoken with Mr. Queter, especially in 2020, when I was running for an elected office myself on a local level, and I had spoken with him previously. We were hoping to do this last year, but because I was running in a race, really couldn't work it out, and that's my fault. And Tom, I apologize for you for the delay on this.
Our campaigns get hairy. You got to do what you got to do.
Absolutely. And you try and do the best you can for the public. And sometimes when I'm trying to do this and an election, you don't want to cross the line. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know, I'm kind of the same kind of person. I sometimes get my hands in too many things at once. One thing I learned last year was to focus more on where I can make some progress, where I can get some messaging out. And of course, winning a race, because that would be the ultimate progress that I believe I could make as a libertarian.
Oh, I can understand completely. So let me ask you, first of all, who is Thomas Queter? Let's start there.
Well, let's start with my birthday. Why not? Go right back to the beginning. On the 24th of this month, I will turn 38. On the 25th, I will be 38 years past my life expectancy at birth. I was born with a severe disability, osteogenesis imperfecta, type 3, originally diagnosed type 2, the difference being longevity of life. And, you know, I went through an awful lot of struggles. My family lived below the poverty line. I personally still do, but my family has improved. We're a bunch of hard workers. Half of my child life was on a dairy farm. The rest of my life was on our own self-sufficiency farm. I still go out to the garden every morning, and when my brother has livestock out, I do assisted management because, well, I was always tagging along with Dad, right? I learned everything that you need to watch out for. I learned how to tell what's coming in an animal, what you need to treat them for, things like that. It's pretty simple, but I mean, you really need that experience. I did graduate high school on time, despite 1,000 fractures. You know, that was a battle. Right from the beginning, my parents and I were fighting for me to be in school, and it was a fight for the entire 13 years. I did get accepted to a 4-year architecture program, but I didn't find accessibility there. Alfred SUNY. I found accessibility as far as the dorm, but as far as the curriculum, the promises they made just didn't happen. And I'm not the kind of person to waste money. So after a year, I did come home to pursue other goals. The interesting thing is I'm probably the only person you've had on your show who has actually found a way around the FDA rules. When I was 15, I discovered a going treatment for my condition. It had been approved here since the 70s for any other condition with a low bone density symptom. And I actually did that myself. My parents were working too hard. And I made the connections to meet the doctors and go through a study out of Canada, of all places, in 1998. That brought my fracture rate from over 100 down to less than 1 per year. So I'm pretty fit as a fiddle now, all things considered. And The important thing there is whether it's poverty, healthcare, um, the suppression of our rights when you're forced on the welfare, or you don't have a choice of welfare. I've seen all these things. I've lived all these things, and I absolutely understand how hard it is from these perspectives. The interesting thing,
Mhm.
why become a libertarian? Right? I was never registered for the Democrats or the Republicans, and I got kind of influenced by Gary Johnson's run in 2016. And, so I kind of considered myself a libertarian. And I met a friend of ours, someone that we both know, Larry Sharp,
Mhm.
in
Good friend.
2019. And that's when I became a libertarian by registration. And it wasn't, I didn't become a libertarian by reading the platform. I didn't become a libertarian by listening to Larry Sharp. I became a libertarian by seeing libertarianism in action. My particular situation, I require a power wheelchair, right? But not just any power wheelchair. It has to have a suspension, brittle bones. I also dislocate very easily. So anything I'm in has to have a good suspension. And the changes to the healthcare in the last 8 years or so meant that when I reapplied for the same wheelchair I'd had 5 times prior, same exact model, same brand, same features, I got denied. I was told I had to select from a certain range of wheelchairs, which had no suspension. And in my situation, that's going to lead to injury, and that's going to put me to the bed. And if you're familiar with elderly or disability situations, going to the bed is not a good thing because you typically don't come back.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was trying to keep the wheelchair I had going. I was buying parts wherever I could find them, and I was on the eBay app actually. I was looking at a rear end assembly, the rear forks that hold the wheels,
Mhm.
and the apps these days, they like to tease you for the next one over, right? To show you just a little bit of it, so you swipe.
Right.
Well, I swiped, and it was a whole chair that had never been used, and it was listed on eBay for $4,000. Now, I made a joke of that because I didn't have $4,000. That's a lot of money to someone in my situation, and posted it. And 2 of my libertarian friends spent a couple of days convincing me to allow them to crowdfund that wheelchair. It took 2 months. It took 2 months for them to raise the money, crate and ship and modify the chair because of some special seating needs that I have. 2 months. Through New York systems, I have never gotten a wheelchair in less than 6 months, and usually it takes closer to 2 years when you apply.
2 years?
2 years. 2 years. Think about that.
That's a crazy amount of time.
Yeah, and if you need new batteries, you're lucky if it takes less than 2 months. Can you imagine sitting still for 2 months or 2 years?
I can't imagine disruption in anyone's life to not being able to move around for even a couple of days, let alone months at a time. I mean, there's so many ways you would imagine that would affect you.
Yeah, and I'm not a sit down person, believe it or not. Pardon the pun. I like to do things, and so when you have that kind of mentality, it's even worse, right? I mean, I think we saw this in 2020. All the people who were stuck home because of the um, COVID regulations. I mean, whether you agree with that or not, what we can see is that there were severe mental health problems. There was a rise in incidents of domestic violence, rise in drug use. So, you make someone sit still for the 5 years, but I sat still. I mean, I didn't completely sit still. I kept the chair going enough to use in the home and an occasional 50-foot distance from the house, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, just think about the efficacy of the timing there, right? The perfect solution, which was actually better than what I had applied for. This thing has more suspension than I ever could have gotten through state systems. 2 months, I got a better solution than I'd ever gotten, and a much better solution than I was offered, that they normally take 6 to 24 months. that's going to impact you, right?
Yeah.
If someone gives you a solution that's so much better than this all-powerful state system that we think helps people, you're going to change your mind real quick.
It
So-
does highlight the inefficiencies of government. Yeah. Real quick.
Now, here's the other aspect. I'm a libertarian. I love numbers. I like numbers. I love working a budget. I live on a very meager budget, and I know how to budget. The chair that would have injured me, that the state would have given me, would have cost the taxpayers around $19,000. By the time this one was purchased, created, shipped, and modified, it was $6,500. Talk about doing more for less.
Yeah. 1/3 is substantial. Yeah.
Correct. So then I was asked to form the Chenango County affiliate. And I'm a
Libertarian Party.
yes, of course.
Mhm.
Always Libertarian Party with me. They can't get rid of me. Some of them probably want to, but they can't. So you just think about those numbers, and you think about everything everybody goes through. And I'm also a disabilities advocate. I've spent over 8 years reaching out to people who were in the exact kind of situation I was in, and I was still stubborn about accepting help, to convince them that they need to learn to ask for help. They need to learn that they deserve happiness and to have what they need in life. And the interesting thing there is when someone doesn't get what they actually need through a system, they think, oh, well, the government's so powerful and they can't help me. Obviously, no one else can. That's just not true. And we actually do see examples of this in our community all the time. I don't know how many chicken barbecues you drive past in a season, but they're usually to help fund a good cause, whether it's a fire department or the kid up the road who's got an ailment that their family can't afford to treat, or whatever it is. That's libertarian. Every time you buy a piece of chicken at a chicken barbecue, I want you to remember that is libertarianism. Every time you help a good cause out of your own pocket voluntarily, that is libertarianism. It is direct assistance that helps much more quickly. And I guess the simple way to put this is that through my advocacy for those with disabilities who get left out of systems, I discovered what I already knew, but I discovered it in such a profound way that your loved ones, your neighbors, and your community spending their own money voluntarily to help you is so much quicker, so much more efficient, so much more cost effective than waiting on a bloated bureaucracy to spend a ton of money on paperwork, making you wait, and not providing a good solution. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious once you've gone through it. It's harder for those who haven't been in those situations. I remember talking to an older gentleman when I was campaigning. I was actually just shopping. I was in the store. And he was a Democrat. And we got talking about it, right? Because I was wearing my campaign shirt. And his statement, which I can't remember word for word, went something like, I always thought these systems were there to help me when I needed it. But the reality is they're not. A lifelong older Democrat had that sudden realization the minute he was in that situation. I think that's amazing. So what does that tell me? Well, through those 8 years, these angles of approaching solutions of problems that weren't being solved by an institution, welfare, that claimed to solve them, told me explicitly that we're spending too much money on a really bad investment that has a really poor return to our communities. And that the best way to improve those solutions is to improve our economy. That's ultimate. When the economy has less, the people in the communities have less, and then they have less to share with themselves and each other, and those solutions that government won't provide are harder to get. I actually found it more and more difficult to get people to help an individual in that situation over that 8-year period. And of course, we've seen what's happened to the economy over that 8-year period. To me, that just makes sense.
So we've covered a wide range of things here in what you're describing of life experiences, the realization of inefficiency of government, which I think is probably one of the biggest questions and issues that affect the average person in America. No matter whether you're rich or poor, no matter whether you're a Democrat or a Libertarian, a conservative or a Republican, inefficiency of government is one of the things that is probably the leading cause of voter apathy, one of the leading causes of why people are so disinterested or perhaps even upset with government, because it just doesn't run well. We see that in every aspect of government, and it doesn't matter which party's in charge. Pretty much almost any party, you're always going to get that same, to some degree.
Yeah. If it can, I would say that the solutions offered from the Democrats and the Republicans, and I'm sorry to beat up on Democrats and Republicans, but politicians, right?
Sure.
Politics. They say something, and then they don't actually do it, or they don't do it correctly, or they don't do it efficiently because they failed to stand up for the principles that they're running on. That's how we ended up with restrictions on working if you need assistance with health care. There's no reason why I shouldn't have a job except for the fact that I need government health care. That's the reason. If I get a job, I can't afford to replace that health care. I can't afford to, I can't afford to get the schooling I would need to get the kind of job that would replace the health care out of pocket. The time it would take to work my way up the ladder, as we're always hearing about, which I believe in, would be this much more time than it would take for me to end up in a situation where I couldn't work. So what's the point of me taking a job that I'm capable of if it's going to cause me to suffer and die because I lose the assistance I need? That sounds like free welfare for everybody, but I'm not really a fan of that either. I want solutions that work. I want solutions that taper down, and we have to work on getting there. So far, we've only been working on getting away from that.
Okay, so you're mentioning some very interesting aspects of what's failed in government that I think we've all, again, it doesn't matter what party, it doesn't matter your economic status. These are things that everyone has seen and pretty much every politician has talked about. Matter of fact, in your run in 2020 for the New York 52nd District, you had spoken about many of these issues. Now, in that election, you were going up against a State Senator Fred Akshar, who is an incumbent and a Republican. You were the only other candidate in the race, and I believe you got 14% of that final vote.
Yeah, it depends on
newcomer.
I've seen anywhere from 12 to 14, depending on Ballotpedia and the state site. It depends on what you're looking at.
The last numbers I was looking at most recently comes from Ballotpedia, which would come from the New York Board of Elections. And that's taking into account write-ins and mail-ins and everything else. So about 14%. And what I'm seeing there is you're a new person on the scene in terms of politics. You're an unknown. People weren't familiar with you before, and many people aren't familiar with the Libertarian Party. Recently, in the last week, we've been hearing a lot of news about the New York 52nd race. Mr. Fred Akshar is now stepping down as a member of the New York State Senate. and he's going to be seeking a new position. He's running for an entirely different race. The current mayor of Binghamton, who's coming up on his last couple of months of his term, he's going to be out of office due to term limits. The Binghamton mayor, Rich David, is now looking to run for the New York 52nd district as a Republican to replace Fred Akshar. The Democrat has not stepped into the race yet. Oh, excuse me. There was a change of one of the candidates' parties. The Democrat running is the now Democratic candidate, Nick Libis, who previously had run as a Republican for that same seat. He switched parties.
He ran as a Republican for Assembly 122, if I remember correctly.
Not the Assembly. He was running for this. He had a primary with Fred Akshar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he lost. But he is again running, but he is now running as a Democrat for the New York 52nd district. As a candidate, a prior candidate, are you looking to run again?
Yes, actually. I believe you're airing this on Friday the 11th, as we discussed. That is the same day that my press release is going out. I do intend to run. Actually, it's a funny story. A lot of candidates, I saw this in the Libertarian Party a lot, at election night, it's real nerve-wracking and emotional, and you're waiting to see. And personally, I was not. I was either going to win because I did my job properly, or I wasn't. I did not. And so I woke up on November 4th, and I'm thinking to myself, I've been doing this for almost a year. What am I going to do today? What does Tom Queter do on the day after he loses his election? Well, he starts putting his campaign back together. November 4th, I started making sure that some of my best volunteers were still with me, and they are. It's growing. My team is growing. I found some better campaign tools, which is interesting. A lot of people don't realize just how many different tools it takes to run a campaign.
It can be very, very trying. There's a lot of steps and a lot of parts behind the scenes that people don't usually see. Most people just think it's throw up a 30-second ad and that's it. It's like, no, there's a lot more involved.
Yeah. And, I have an excellent communications director now. He's professional. He comes from the PR world. And he has worked on both Democrat and Republican campaigns. I like the guy. He's real astute at what he does. I have huge party support. Actually, I have support from the state committee and the executive committee of the state committee. And I have a lot of support from the National Libertarian Party because I did a lot of networking. A lot of people don't know. I was a delegate to our national conference last year. When the governor said, you can't go anywhere with a bunch of these arbitrary rules, people would be at risk of losing, say, their health care or their, I believe it was even imposed, maybe their children if they traveled without permission, whereas in their job, right? I didn't have a job to lose. I didn't have children to lose. And my health care was so dwindled that I really wasn't worried about it because it just doesn't meet my needs, right? Health care has gone cookie cutter, and I don't fit into that cookie cutter. So it was like, you know what? We need delegates in Orlando to make sure that the rest of our delegates who can't go to Orlando get to participate remotely. The Libertarian Party, by the way, the first national party to have a remote and or hybrid national convention, and we pulled it off. We pulled it off in that kind of time frame. First half of the convention was entirely online. Second half, about 300 or so people showed up in person, and the rest of us were online. So while I was there, I networked and I talked the way I talk. I'm a very relatable person. I think you're aware. We've met a few times, had a few conversations. And I garnered a ton of support because my focus is on solving social issues by increasing our economy. Without the resources in our communities cannot address their own problems. And you know, we've been saying this a few times now. If it's a government system, it's bureaucracy. If it's bureaucracy, it's wasteful. If it's wasteful, it's a bad investment with a poor return. We need to stop these bad investments one way or another. My policies, which are on my website, tomfor52.com, they're full of options. They're not forcing anyone to lose anything. They are offering solutions that can be had and accepted by each individual, specifically when it comes to those with disabilities. For instance,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So an awful lot of money is spent on me that doesn't help me. Why? One thing that's very costly is brick and mortar costs, travel costs, and labor costs within the welfare system. And why is that so expensive? Between the 3 social workers that I see every year, someone comes 16 times a year to make sure that my genetic condition that's incurable, that I was born with, hasn't gone away, and I'm not suddenly walking around and carrying 50-pound bags of peat.
Really?
Yes, they have to come make sure I'm still not walking.
Even though that's in your file, it's documented and it's with respect visually obvious.
Yeah, and it gets worse. It gets worse. So through that, about every year, you go through the universal assessment system.
Mm-hmm.
You probably heard Larry Sharp talk about box checking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This is a prime example. It's a huge form with many options that has to be filled out every time. And if the social worker makes a mistake, or if it gets recorded wrong at the office, or if it gets somehow misinterpreted as it's transferred to the state, mistakes get made. I'm going to point out a mistake that was made about me, which is kind of funny, but I want you to remember that the same mistake in another aspect of that UAS with another condition could lead to injury and death for another individual. And it happens. It happens all the time. I was listed as having feet but no legs and the ability to drive without assistive technology by the state of New York. I spent 4 years showing every social worker I had contact with my legs. It took 4 years for that to get changed. I mean, and it sounds kind of funny, right? Because it's me. But if it was a medication, if it was a home care need, that could be severely detrimental. Severely. Let alone if you're dealing with someone who has dementia or other cognitive issues. Those are the kinds of help that people need. And if you're undergoing that assessment every year and a mistake can be made every time you undergo it, you know, that's insane. But let's focus on the waste here. My one social worker is a services coordinator. She has to come see me every month. She drives 90 minutes each way. That's reimbursed by the state. She's paid for that time. She does a few hours of paperwork before she leaves the office, spends an hour with me, goes back and does many more hours of paperwork, and then back and forth to the state to make sure that they agree with the paperwork, right? That's an awful lot of cost. If you ever run a business, think about that as an employee. Think about that as resources. You're spending money on that.
See, this brings up a couple of, you're hitting on a lot of different topics on a lot of different things. Obviously, healthcare is one of the biggest concerns for, well, in New York State being a bluer than blue Democratic state overall, even though upstate is more center right overall. We still see it's generally considered a blue state. So healthcare is a very big concern we hear about in almost every one of the elections here. Obviously, there's many other aspects, and we're going to talk about a couple of them in a moment. But looking at healthcare itself, what kind of reform would you look to try and get if you were to be in the New York State Senate? What kind of reform would you try and put through that the average American, a New Yorker, someone in the 52nd district would be able to see and appreciate and change their life?
So right now in New York, there are very few hospital chains, which are really monopolies. There's UHS, there's Bassett, and there's another one that I can never remember. And they dominate the hospital field. And they do so through the normal realms of government. We need to allow more options for that. And something preventing those options is actually certificates of need. We require a certificate of need no matter how good a doctor is, no matter how well trained a doctor is. And that suppresses the competition. And without competition among doctors, you're not going to have competition among the hospitals. New York is in an interesting position as well. People forget, and I say this almost every chance I get, your county is there to protect you from your state. Your state is there to protect you from the federal government. And New York State is one of the states that actually has the power to levy or leverage against the federal mandates. We could do that on so many levels. So with healthcare, what we could do there is make our own rules instead of the FDA that seem to hold us back. I know the FDA is supposed to be there to protect us, but when you look at it, how many things do they repeal that they first approved? How much do they actually do? That's a big
Drug
question.
recalls and all that.
Yeah. I mean, they say this is okay, and then they say, "Oh, wait, we were wrong." And in my case, like I said, the drug that I get intravenously was approved since the 70s for low bone density conditions. I have a low bone density condition, but it took until 1998 for me to get it through a study through another country. That just doesn't make sense. But what we really need to do is focus on increasing the competition among hospitals, which means more hospitals. We need to focus on increasing the competition between professionals, eliminating certificates of need. Other states do this by joining in with other states in cooperation, so that if you're a registered doctor that's got all the credentials from one of those states in that agreement, you can participate as a doctor in the economy in any of those states. New York doesn't do that.
Reciprocal licensing you're talking about.
Correct. And, New York has a 2% tax on healthcare. Why are we taxing healthcare?
No, New York taxes everything. Literally, New York State taxes pretty much everything. Yeah.
Right. So the only answer to that is bad decisions. New York taxes healthcare because it made a bad decision. I really don't think that's the case.
So you would try and get rid of that tax?
I would absolutely try to get rid of that 2% tax. I would absolutely encourage more of a free market economy with our healthcare. I know that scares people. Free market, nobody's going to stop them from doing bad things. Nobody's stopping them now. Malpractice is a huge problem. We talk about things like pandemics often. It seems like almost every 4 years. You notice that? And
a little bit more frequently than that, but yeah, that's the big ones usually. right along with elections, there's been a lot more coincidence of these things.
Yeah. And yeah, they're absolutely, from our perspective, from what we know, a coincidence. But how many coincidences do you need? The reason that we were so unprepared for that was actually regulation. We talk about the nursing homes a lot, right? What happened at the nursing homes? They want to blame Governor Cuomo for what he did with the nursing homes in 2020. Well, no, blame him for what's been going on for the last decades, because those regulations were instilled prior. They have to return them back to their home, their living home, right? Elderly home. That's a regulation. You have to take them back.
Well, let me ask this, because just with the taxes that you're looking to, one of the goals being to repeal that. And then we'll talk about some of the other proposals perhaps. But looking at just trying to get that repeal, New York State is notorious, if nothing else, for, as I said, having a tax for everything. There's almost nothing in New York State that doesn't have a tax. So how would you convince the Democrats, especially those downstate in New York City, that are using these taxes to try and, well, New York State's in a deficit, so it doesn't really offset anything. But they claim that that's helping to offset and pay for various aspects of medication and healthcare in New York State. What would you say to them? Say, hey, this isn't making sense. We should get rid of this. And what would you, well, let's go with that. Yeah.
So I would first try to find out which ones own businesses. Because if they own a business, they understand overhead. They understand that a business treats tax like an overhead. If you're taxing a hospital or a doctor at 2% for the procedures or the health care that they give, that's a cost burden. That's going to make it harder to run that hospital. It's going to make it harder to staff that hospital. I don't think it takes a huge stretch of logic to understand that when you remove something, it's no longer there. I'd like that 2% of healthcare back.
So you would give it directly back to the public, not used in the government.
I would remove the tax, and that's how you give it back. Because if you're not taxing, you're not taking it away.
By the way, I'm not familiar with what that percentage works out to. Do you know what that would be on a per person basis on average?
No, I don't have that exact number. It's actually hard to figure out for the systems. There's a lot of hidden costs that you can't calculate for. However, if we put it in simple terms, if we had 100 patients with COVID and those procedures were taxed at 2%, that's 2 more people that could be treated at that cost. You pump that back into any system and it's going to add 2% right back in. And you don't have to pump it in, you just stop taking it.
Okay. It sounded like, give me a second, because it sounded across my system, that last answer was just a little garbled. Can you say that again? Because I want to make sure we did hear that for you.
Okay, so the best way to pump.
Yeah, now you're coming across clear. Okay, go ahead.
The best way to pump the tax system back into the economy is to just stop taxing. And we're talking about healthcare. Why are we taxing? What's the point? There is no good to people's health needs that comes from taxing healthcare.
Okay.
So if we just stop taking that 2%, it's left in the system.
Okay. Well, since we're talking about things that are going back to the public, things that are helping to benefit, obviously, I think that brings up unemployment. And we just had some of the unemployment numbers come out. We're now into month 4 or 5 of the Biden administration, and we're starting to see certain realities, especially under the Cuomo administration. And we know that right now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we had last seen the report, New York State is about 8.2% unemployment overall, depending, we're about 5.7% unemployment in Broome County. That number depends on exactly how you're looking at the way the government is counting it. And it is not accurate. It's not for the month of May. It's still behind by about a month and a half. So the answer there, though, is we have higher than normal average unemployment. In Broome County, it is even higher than that, than most of the average of the country. We're seeing businesses close. That is a fact. In New York State, we saw in 2020, 30% of all businesses closed forever. We've seen as of January, as we've reported on this program before, estimates have been made that by the time we get done with June, an additional 40% of the remaining businesses will close forever. And that's including the government aid that has been able to reach various businesses. How would the Queter administration, if you were to be State Senator Queter, excuse me, how do you expect to address the unemployment issue?
So that's a very mixed bag. One, the unemployment numbers, as you pointed out, are not correct. You know, I don't count on that unemployment number, never have. Yet here I am unemployed. Part of this could be addressed by removing some of the restrictions on welfare. You know, like I said earlier, if you work, you lose. There's no incentive to have to work harder for less. That's a big thing. It's always been a thing since before COVID. In regard to this year, next year, 2022 and 2023, we really need to start seeing some rollbacks on some business taxes, some property taxes. You know, people are always talking about, you know, we've lost almost 2 million people in this state in the last however many years, 8 or 10.
Well, according to the sentences,
Yeah.
surprisingly, no one really understands that.
Yeah. So whatever it is, we're losing a population. We've been losing a population. We lost a congressional district. It's almost like we need to give people a reason to stay. And one of the reasons they're leaving is high taxes. In January of 2020, the tax on a rented vehicle went from 8 to 20%. Just like that. That's just one small example. But we also have bed taxes. We also have road taxes. I mean, everything gets taxed and nothing improves. Taxes go up, they still don't improve. I think it's very obvious that a lot of that money is wasted, again, through bureaucracy. We talk about that all the time. But I think we could easily look at some things that are going on and find some places to cut without actually harming people. That is the big discussion, right? Left and right. We need more taxes so we can help more people, and yet when we tax higher, more people need help, and it just keeps going. In District 52, we have a significant amount of agricultural land gets ignored. I say let's give them an initial property tax break to start farming, to start producing agriculture. There's so much property in this district that could be utilized to increase production, to increase even our relations with New York City. I hate to say it, but you know, in New York City, the restaurants, they're all about something called farm to table, fresh, locally raised products of a higher quality. You know what we have in District 52? The ability to provide them if we get the government out of the way. One, that's a huge dichotomy, right? Upstate and downstate. If we can make it better for each other, it's probably going to be better. One way we can do that is we can impose our own rules. Oh wait, we already have. We don't have to follow the USDA because most of those same rules apply to our state and local health departments. They're already there. Another way, there's no reason why it has to be so expensive to process meat. You know, one other boom that could happen is hemp. And we're kind of seeing the state try to start addressing that. But again, there's such a high regulatory burden, such a high tax burden on hemp or even medical cannabis that the price goes up and the sale goes down. I was actually on a group call with a handful of cannabis entrepreneurs, people who own large cannabis businesses that seek new states once they legalize or go to even a hemp industry. And they're looking at the New York tax code and the New York regulation that came out, and they're telling me this is the most complex, convoluted, anti-business tax structure they've ever seen. And they're not coming here. They're not coming here.
Well, we do know, and it is a correct fact, that for the last roughly 7 years, New York State has been either 50th, 49th, or 48th least business-friendly state in the United States, consistently on several different Forbes and Business Insider and several other recognized institutional tracking of the business friendliness of various states. New York historically and consistently ranks at the bottom, if not the bottom itself. Usually it's a race between New York and California on that.
Good news, New York, we're starting to win.
Yeah, if it's a race to be the worst for a business, we do that well. That's one they get. The current systems have been getting very well. But so you're looking at, let me look at it this way. So you're looking at trying to cut taxes. You want to and that should spur business, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah. So people realize that taxation or taxes, particularly when it's undue or overly burdensome, that's an overhead cost. Any business that has to pay taxes works that into their overhead, hands it down to their customer, and the customer pays more money. That makes life less livable, less affordable. Life is not affordable in New York.
Well, let me ask this about this, because right now we have Nick Libis, who, and by the way, for people who don't know, I am familiar with every candidate who is running in the New York 52nd State Senate race for 2022. I've known each of the individuals for a couple of years, if not many years. So everyone here is familiar to me, just for full disclosure for everybody. So Nick Libis was a Republican for many years. His family, under former state senator Tom Libis, had run for he controlled the 52nd district, and Nick is running for that race. As I said, he ran as a Republican. He's now running as a Democrat. He's running in part to cut taxes. Rich David, who is a Republican, he is the mayor of Binghamton, New York. He's looking to cut taxes. You've mentioned you want to cut taxes. So we have a race where everybody's saying they want to cut taxes, and yet everybody admits New York State has the highest, or if not the highest, the top 3 highest taxes in the United States. How do we address this? What makes your view on taxes or cutting taxes different than what we're hearing from these other candidates at this time?
So my focus obviously is on District 52 and what I know about it. Mm-hmm. There are many districts in the state that are very similar. As you noted, most of upstate are very similar. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of agricultural land. We have a lot of hardworking people who like to work, like to produce. We need to let them. I talk about cannabis a lot because it is a boom industry and it can be a boom here. It's also good for our healthcare. So if we can replace even the slightest bit of healthcare with a plant that's grown and produced locally, that's a solution that replaces the expensive system to a degree. The other thing is, libertarians, we get a bad rap. We like to say taxation is theft, and we call out all taxes, and we say that taxation is illegal, and everybody has their own opinion on that. But my opinion is there are 2 ways to cut taxes. It's very simple. You can cut taxes by obviously addressing taxes that are ridiculous or misused. You can address the bureaucracy aspect, right? Like I was talking about with welfare and my own situation. That's one system. That's one particular instance, one system. It's spread throughout. I would need a team of people, which I can get, to go through all of these systems as best as we can and figure out what's ridiculous. Stop the insanity. If you do something on repeat over and over again, expecting a different result, that's actually the definition of insanity.
Well, in New York State, it's a state known for varying degrees of insanity if you happen to be a non-progressive. If you're not part of the Democratic Socialists of America, which seem to have a strong sway in this state, especially downstate New York, in the New York City region, you're really, they have the most extreme views, and they seem to have the biggest sway in government at this time. And it's kind of striking because no one else seems to agree with them except themselves. Looking at what we're seeing in government at this moment, what would you say is if you only had one thing that you would be able to achieve that would set you apart from any other candidate and would be the message that would be heard throughout the state? Let me ask you, what is that message that you're looking to put out there?
So, as I was saying, there's two ways to grow the economy. One of those is obviously, cutting the taxes where we can. The other one is getting out of the way of business. Now, I'm not saying that we want to set up an oil refinery in somebody's backyard. I'm not saying we want to be irresponsible with the businesses we let in, but there are plenty of businesses that are perfectly viable for our current situation, like cannabis and local farming, that can just simply, we can get out of the way of them. One of my other initiatives, and this is important, is building a pipeline from school, K through 12, to industry with trades programs. We've heard this talked about before. Nobody seems to actually do it very well, but it works. People go into the military to learn trades. Well, let's keep them home to learn trades and let them go to work for the economy. I'm not an anti-military guy. I grew up around veterans. I grew up around World War I, II, Korean War, Vietnam War veterans. My mother worked at the veterans home for the elderly. My grandparents were all veterans. My father was a veteran. So it's not that I'm anti-military. It's that I'm pro-economy. And we do, unfortunately, focus our trades learning in our military more than at home in our schools. That's why you do see the military come out and become welders and other experts. I actually know many of them. But a pipeline from 10th grade or so into a trade school with more trades options would be very beneficial to the economy over, say, 10 years. Because then you have people coming out of high school who need a couple more years of experience, and they could do a well-positioned job to have an income that's livable. I know so many people my age who are gone from this state. They left, they escaped the economy, that's what they tell me. And they're tradespeople. They had to leave to learn their trade. They had to go to the military, learn their trade, and in the process of being moved around from base to base, they find communities in other states with less burdens. And then their trade is more valuable there. It's not a hard decision for them to say, I'm not coming back. I really think that it's a huge problem. We need to bring our children home, and I don't mean from overseas and war. I mean to New York State. We need to give them reasons to come back and be a part of their community that they grew up in, they know and love, and be able to live. When I was going through school, I saw things like shop classes and tap go to the wayside. Fewer classes available every year. That was my particular school district. I don't know if that's still going on, but We could increase it. Skilled labor is necessary. And believe it or not, you don't need a 4-year degree to run an excavator.
Well,
my brother was driving a tractor by the time he was 8.
and I understand the issue of apprenticeships. We've talked about this on this program many times. We've been speaking about increasing the amount of trade skills and trade schooling in the United States as well as in New York State on this channel since about 2014. So that's not something we disagree with you on at all. We agree there is a dearth of trade skills. We do need to improve that. Apprenticeships are the fastest way to address that dearth that is growing in America at this time. So we understand and sympathize with your thoughts on that. But you've mentioned a couple of times hemp, and I do want to talk about the Second Amendment in a moment, just briefly, but not that it's a brief subject, but let me say, you've mentioned hemp a couple of times. And one of the concerns that a lot of people have right now is hemp has been used as the home run. Now, various politicians like to have their home run ideas. There was up in the Utica, Rome region, there was the drone testing site for New York State that was supported by Anthony Brindisi and others, spending about $250 million. It was supposed to bring in $80 million a year in drone testing into the New York 22nd District, and it never happened. It's completely failed. Recently, there was the $100 million hemp deal in the city of Binghamton, Broome County, that was being promoted by Assemblywoman Donna Pardo of the 123rd District, promising that this would be a revolutionary deal in 2019. It was going to bring in 400 jobs, and it was going to help this economy to turn around, and it was a home run. And the jobs haven't started, the business isn't here, and they have already downscaled the promise from 400 jobs down to 20. How is your thoughts on hemp being not a panacea, but that home run idea? And I shouldn't say it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what it's being looked at and being said by other politicians at this moment. How is what you're looking at different?
So the programs you mentioned, I assume, are all programs that spend taxpayer money, right?
They did.
Okay. We don't have to spend money to incentivize that business. We just have to get out of the way. Those businesses exist in other states. We have an excellent, excellent region for growing it. And you don't have to spend money on it. You just have to get out of their way. I know one of the problems with hemp in the last few years was not having processing ability. I know for medicinal hemp for CBD, I was talking to a local CBD shop. They grow their own, and their neighbor also grows their own for their business. But their neighbor had their crop tested, came in just slightly above the limit. Right? I think it's 0.3% THC for medicinal CBD. Slightly above. You know what happened? It wasn't composted. It wasn't composted. It didn't get turned into cattle feed. Certainly wasn't turned into rope. They forced that farmer to burn his crop.
Because it was over the legal limit.
Arbitrarily.
It's one of the problems with that industry. It's tricky. I mean, plants grow the way plants grow.
Well, right. And, weather varies. Genetics vary. It's not entirely in the farmer's control. The other issue there is, what part of the plant did they have? Because the top of a hemp plant is going to have more cannabinoids, more resins than the bottom part of the plant. I don't know how they tested. Did they test an average through the crop? Or did they just pick one? That would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's a very interesting industry, and it drives me nuts. I know
So actually, just talk to a carpenter out of Pennsylvania. You've probably seen the price of lumber lately, right? That's a huge problem.
Everyone's seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? He's building cabinets out of hemp board. He's not paying more money.
That's an interesting alternative. I don't know if a lot of people know that hemp board exists.
Board, plastic, insulation, you name it, it can be done. Even wood pellet replacements.
Okay, because I've heard it always as a clothing alternative. Hemp is clothing
Scratchy.
for those fibers.
I wouldn't want to wear it scratchy, but you can build it.
Yeah. Okay. It is an industry that is untapped, so there's opportunities there.
Plenty.
Let me ask you something that we've talked about a little bit about the race. We've talked a little bit about what you look to do in 2022 and beyond. We've talked a little bit about your opponents and in general, the New York economy, which is in trouble. No one denies that. But as much as healthcare, the economics, jobs, your outlook may be important, there's another very, very important issue for our channel. We cover this significantly, and many people are familiar with it. So I do want to address it with you in terms of the Second Amendment. New York State is not known as a strong Second Amendment state. In fact, many would say that it is a anti-Second Amendment state. We've had many bills that have been proposed recently, which include removing the ability for citizens like yourself, myself, to be able to have a bulletproof vest. We've had requests to ban various types of firearms. We have the New York SAFE Act, which has completely failed to reduce gun violence even before. Go ahead.
It's actually the unsafe.
Yeah, I know. Everyone likes to call it that. And very much so. Very much so. I can see why people would say that, because it's a complete failure. And that's not political. The numbers, when we look at the data, the New York GIVE report, when we look at the reporting from various localities throughout the state, it doesn't work. Red flag laws, over 628 of them have been executed since the law was put in place. It has not reduced any of its gun violence, nor has it reduced suicides, nor has it hasn't done anything that it was promised to do.
Yeah.
And we just had in the last week even more bills that are, again, still more outrageous, taking away American citizens' Second Amendment rights. And of course, as I said, on this program, the channel, we have a bias on this point of view. We admit that freely. Where do you stand on that?
Okay, so I am a 2A supporter. There are a few reasons behind that. One of them really has absolutely nothing to do with the Second Amendment. I grew up poor. We hunted timber. I was 5 years old the first time I took gray squirrel, because that's what we ate. We were that poor. Many, many people in this state still live on game. And a lot of these restrictions are going to hinder that ability. If you have a waiting period for a rifle that's longer than a hunting season, and you go out the first day of season and your rifle, goes kaput, what are you going to do? That's kind of a general example, and most of them can be repaired. I know that, but let's face it, those instances are going to happen.
Sure.
And wildlife management is important. We removed all the predators for the whitetail, and we have seen die-offs over starvation and disease. And we need hunters. We need people to take the deer that are becoming a nuisance because of our actions almost 100 years ago. Now, the other thing is self-defense. Okay. I think I told you a little bit about my condition. I have brittle bones. Even with my with my treatments that I receive, I'm still physically at risk. No, sorry to use you as an example here, Michael, but if you took a spring at me and landed it, I'd be gone. And where I live, it's 30 minutes to 3 days for the police to show up. I love my sheriff's office. Most of them are damn decent people. Most of the troopers that I've interacted with have been damn decent people. And I know them. I grew up with some of them. And I appreciate them. But the fact remains those systems are, people forget what police are supposed to do. They don't prevent crime. That's not their job. Their job is actually to respond to and address crime. And to that note, that means that they're not beside you all day, every day. And many of the weapons that New York seeks to make illegal or cost beyond my ability to attain over various fees and regulations, you're not allowed to have them. I did have an AR last year. I did end up having to sell that, unfortunately, because, well, I spent my own money on my campaign, Michael, and I had to pay off that debt in time to not increase the interest. And now, fortunately, that debt is gone. I'm very good with money. And hey, there's a campaign slogan. I'm very good with money. That might work in New York.
Yeah.
But, I don't care who you are. You have the right to live. And when the state is simultaneously removing your self-defense rights and increasing the bottom, when we have all these social issues, that creates these situations for which we would need self-defense, we can't all be police officers. I mean, does our governor expect 1 out of every 2 people to be a police officer? Because that buddy system is the only thing that's going to protect us if we don't have our rights to self-defense.
It would be it's unclear when I've asked Democrats and the leadership of New York State and many other states as well, what they expect to replace the ability to defend yourself, as the Ninth Circuit Court seems to believe we don't have the right to do, as we've heard from various Democrats who say they want to take, like Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. And
foreign use, assault weapons ban was just turned over by the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And there was an appeals court in California, if I believe you're talking about Judge Bartlett. Or no, not Bartlett. It's
okay, an appeals.
Yeah, but it's the appeals court of California. Mm-hmm.
Regardless, the law was overturned by California. Yes. Congratulations, New York. California made themselves better than you. People talk about guns as if they're terrible, as if they're ill-intended, as if they're evil, and as if that gun wants to hurt you. And I'm sorry, no, that's people. That's people. That's people in a bad situation, often desperate, often with psych issues. And as Billy's advocate, I can tell you that the mental health facilities in New York, again, for all the same reasons as I went through with my own situation, are terrible. They're waning. I know another advocate that, boy, he used to work in it. He was extremely passionate. And he talks about the death rate of people going through mental health issues in the mental health systems. And it's provocative. If I can find it again, I'll send that to you. So how do we address this problem while allowing people to have the right self-defense? Well, first, we need to recognize that just because New York State says you can't have guns doesn't mean people don't have guns. Black markets are created by these kinds of restrictions. Alcohol prohibition didn't work. Cannabis prohibition didn't work. Pretty sure there's still a lot of meth and heroin going around New York. I'm pretty sure they're illegal. Find something that's illegal, and I'll find you a black market, because that's just the way it works. So how do we address this problem without removing our rights? Well, part of that's education. You know, we used to have rifle teams in schools.
Yes.
My mother was captain of a rifle team in the 60s. She'll outshoot you, Michael. I'm sorry. I know you have experience, but she'll outshoot you. He's amazing. Now, I don't know how I would convince New York's legislature to repeal some of these laws. I would try like hell. You know, my opponent last cycle is famous for a statement that I'm told he made at a Tioga Scope meeting. Was that the last name of the gentleman who told me was Wilson, but he's a very big 2A supporter, Republican, and he supported me because he stated to me that he heard Red Akshar say that it wasn't worth political capital to defend our rights. I'm sorry. I know sometimes you're on the losing end, and it's like, why should I vote for principle when it's going to lose anyhow? Well, because it's your principles, because it's what the people who elected you want you to do. And
it's one of the reasons why you're running. That's why no matter anyone runs, or I would like to believe anyone's running, in part because they have principles they want to stand for. That's what I would like to believe. Doesn't always happen, but that's what the whole idea is, I would like to think.
Well, I think you pointed out that most of upstate goes red, right?
Yeah.
So most of upstate believes in the Second Amendment, right?
Very
How many counties are in District 52?
What?
Over 2.5.
Yeah.
There are over 2.5 counties in District 52. Most of them lean red and lean towards gun rights.
Mm-hmm. That's accurate.
Most people in this district lean towards gun rights.
That's very accurate.
Why didn't he stand up for your gun rights? Will the next guy stand up for your gun rights? Will there be anybody standing up for any of your rights, or are they going to cave? I'm okay with being a single-term senator because, to be honest with you, I'm not doing this for me. I have 7 nieces and nephews. I have family. I have a community that has spent my entire life supporting me. I'm doing this to support them. And it's their rights that I care about. You know, the interesting situation here, I'm going to go off topic just a little bit.
Sure.
I'm disabled, very obvious. I'm on welfare, everybody knows. I have every option, as I have always had in life, to give up. I could sit here and watch cartoons 24/7. Nobody would mind. Everybody would give me an excuse. But you know what? I'm not that kind of person. I will, if necessary, walk into the fire and do what needs to be done. And if that means losing and not being reelected, at least I stood on my principles and the principles of my constituents. You have to listen to what the people want. You have to vote for what they want. That is representation. If you don't have that, you don't have representation, and you're not a representative if you're not doing that. And so when it comes to the Second Amendment, that's what we need to do.
Well, that brings up a very interesting related issue. Let me address this because you mentioned politicians are supposed to do what the public wants them to do. That's essentially your words just a moment ago, if I understood it correctly.
I'll buy that.
Okay. So on that same premise, there's the question of defunding the police, which goes along with, or we've seen it coupled with the limitations on the Second Amendment. And I believe you've stated in your comments, or at least alluded to, a good relationship with local law enforcement.
Certain ones that I know personally, yes.
Okay. So that's why I want to clarify, because throughout the state right now, being promoted by the far left fringe, the Democratic Socialists of America, which is AOC's organization, the Ithaca chapter, which is known for its violence. These fringe groups are looking for defunding the police, something that we've seen across the country in every city, everywhere that has been tried, has resulted in greater violence. That being said, it's still expanding to more and more cities, more and more counties throughout America to try and defund the police, which effectively means removing some amount of police in every case, every time.
So, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
So, defund the police sounds like, oh, well, no money for police, and we'll have no police. That's really incorrect. And could it lead to removing some officers? Maybe. I hope they start with the ones whose records have been protected when they've done wrong. Nobody wants a bad cop. Even my cop friends don't want bad cops. When they complain to me, there's two things they complain about. Not being able to call out someone they work with who's doing things wrong, and a lot of the tickets they have to issue. Believe it or not, our state troopers don't like giving tickets, but it's their job. So when we talk about defunding the police, I would skew it a different way. Let's make sure the bureaucracy of the police is as efficient as I want the bureaucracy of welfare. Let's make sure that they're not wasting money in certain ways. Let's make sure that we're not putting police in harm's way when we don't have to. Let's ensure that they're funded in such a way that they have to know their communities. I don't know about you, but when I get out of Mount Upton, I have trouble trusting the police. Most people I know, they're driving down the road, they see a cop, oh, there's a cop. These can be perfect people. Good little church ladies will react to seeing a cop. Why? Because they know that's an instrument of punishment as opposed to an instrument of help. And we see that with things like traffic tickets. We see that with things like tickets for candidates. And so I don't want to completely derail the initiative of defund the police, but I definitely want to change the narrative. We need police officers. I think that's pretty obvious. But we also need to know them. And we need them in our communities as much as we need them fighting the bad guy. I think. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I'm just trying to get a clearer answer because it is a fact, and I want to be sure it's very clear. In every city, in every county in America where they have defunded the police, it has absolutely, in every single case, resulted in a reduction in the number of police officers. And in every single case, it has resulted in a community that has seen higher crime, and normally that crime is higher violent crime. That it's hand in hand with defunding the police.
It's hand in hand with the way they're defunding police.
Fair. So you would say there's a different way to do that.
Right, which is what I'm saying. Look for the inefficiencies. Look for community engagement. Look for not putting police in harm's way when we don't have to. And by that, I mean sometimes situations are created. I learned some interesting statistics last year. The number one reason for death of a police officer in New York State from 2018 to that time was car chases. Car chases most often happen in New York over traffic violations and warrants. Maybe just a policy of trying to catch them a different way instead of speeding down the highway would be wise. I know it looks cool, it sounds great. There are other people on the road. Probably not the wisest way to do that, in my own opinion. Sometimes hassling people for their drug addiction is going to elicit a violent response because they're on drugs. And if we can remove some of that stigma and offer better help at the same time, see, we're talking about all these issues as if they're not the same issue, as if they don't affect each other. But if we want to see less drug addicts, less police encounters with drug addicts, which puts police in danger, then we need to fix those systems. We need to fix all of these systems gradually at once. I know that doesn't sound like a soundbite on the media. I remember your opening of the show there, but it certainly is a practical approach. And I don't follow progressives, so that their notion
follow everybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do as much as I can, but I've got my hands in a lot of things. I'm on the state committee and chair of the county. So if we're going to talk about defunding, we need to talk about logic. Look for the money we don't need to spend and stop spending. Look for the failures in the systems that are often detrimental to the police. I mean, I know for a fact that they don't like to handle certain mental health situations. And that's hard for police officers to handle a mental health situation. Let's try to make our systems that address that a little bit better, so we don't have to. Let's decrease their negative interactions while increasing their positive interactions. Let's make sure that a bad cop can't move and continue to be a bad cop. Let's make sure the records follow them. Let's make sure their records, as far as egregious against the public, are public, and that we make sure they get fired. I'm sorry, but if I'm running a dairy farm and I hire somebody and he starts breaking cow tails because he gets mad at cows, that's a thing that people do, by the way, I'm gonna fire the guy. You know what? Our police unions unfortunately protect the people who do wrong, and our authoritarian mentality just gives them this air of being perfect because they put on a uniform. And I'm sorry, I can put on a police uniform too. You know what? Not going to be good at catching bad guys. So we need to remember that everybody's a human being, and we need to make sure that when we do have a problem with a police officer, that it gets addressed. I'm sorry, I'm not anti-police, but even my police friends are against bad cops.
Yeah, I think everyone is. Yeah,
it's something they dislike more because it makes them look bad. It makes their job harder. And I have a friend who's he works for a precinct in Syracuse, and he was telling me, believe it or not, very libertarian approach that his precinct was doing. They weren't getting rid of their guns. They weren't getting rid of their armor, but they were also doing shifts in plainclothes with their psyches to be in the community, be seen and known. That rapport is important. It really, really is. Rather than sitting on the side of the highway, taking a nap, pretending to look for speeders, I would rather than be walking the beat and getting to know the people who live in the community.
Okay. Well, again, I want to make sure people had a way to hear your complete answer. Very often, as we mentioned, as we were mentioning there, sound bites, people don't get to hear a full explanation of where you stand. They hear yes or no, not, well, here's my context, here's everything.
Yeah, so as far as the Libertarian Party goes, I'm the libertarian that's always criticizing the Libertarian Party. Most libertarians are the libertarian that's always criticizing the Libertarian Party. My criticism of the Libertarian Party is some of its extreme messaging. And I don't adopt that messaging, but I definitely agree with the perspective. We can do that with welfare, we can do that with the Second Amendment, and we can do that with police. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be arming 3-year-olds with AKs. I can agree with that. Sure you would. But maybe we shouldn't be restricting the rights of viable adults.
No.
And, one of their statements is defund or abolish the police. And I'm like, well, when you look at the statistics and you look at the things that do happen, and as disabilities advocate, I can tell you some really horrible situations, but I won't, that involve police and disabled children. That happen all the time. And it's a lack of training and from forcing the officers into a situation they're not prepared to it's really not the officer's fault most of the time. So, when we talk about the problems with the police, well, how do we address it? Again, right back to the economy. If you give people better lives, they're not as desperate. And desperate people do desperate things. And those are often crimes, and that often involves the police. And it really just goes cycle around and around. I think if we address the economy and if we address some of the problems, the structure of our police hierarchy, we'll see a better outcome. And I'm not the kind of guy that says, gotta be my way, all the way. No, I'm actually in the Libertarian Party because we like consensus. We like to have that discussion. We like to form committees. We like to bring all the ideas to the table. And you know what happens? Not a single person's idea is completely adopted. We take parts from wherever it makes sense to form a plan that works. And that's an ability that I have that I believe I can do in Albany.
Okay. And actually, speaking about what you plan to do in Albany, and I know we've been on a little longer than we had initially expected, folks, but that's what happens when you have a conversation, when you're talking.
I'm willing to burn it.
Yeah. So, but I always like to give any guest an opportunity at the end to address. I mean, we've talked about the Second Amendment. We've talked about defunding the police. We've talked about health care and business in New York State and taxes. But yet, as much as we've talked about these things, we may not have covered everything. I'm sure we haven't. Go ahead.
I said it's New York.
Yeah, very true. So let me say, we always like to give you the opportunity that if there's an issue you have that you'd like to speak about, go ahead for it.
Okay, so I don't care who you are. I don't care what problem you're facing. And I don't care what color your skin is, or what your religion is, whether or not you have a disability. I don't care about any of those things. All I care about is that we facilitate a community with enough resources for you to thrive and be happy. And that does include at least a little bit of everything we've talked about tonight and more. And, it's not an easy solution. Any politician who is giving you a statement as if it's the end all be all, whether he's got one issue, two issue, or frequently we see three issues, right, Michael, the three pillars, isn't that what we're taught as politicians? They're wrong. They're wrong. It's not just one. It's not just those two. And it's not just those three. We actually need politicians who actually do work. Our assembly and our Senate is actually paid for 6 months of the year. I think you can verify that. Yeah. In other places where they're paid only 6 months of the year, or to work only 6 months of the year, their salaries are much less.
Usually, yeah.
I mean, if you were paying somebody $160,000 a year salary, like, wouldn't you want them to work all 12 months?
That's generally what you would see. Yeah, that's the general marketplace. Yes.
Yeah, and why isn't that so in all
politics? Is obviously very different, though, in New York State, at least.
Well, I like work. I like 16-hour days. I like to sit around thinking, writing, reading paperwork, reading legislation, talking to other great minds. I will not stop working if you elect me. I will work 12 months a year. I don't even like weekends. I have to get up and move. I have to get up and do. That is my mentality. If I'm not making progress on something, I'm not happy.
Well, that's commendable. That's absolutely commendable. And I know for a fact, in watching your work ethic in 2020 and being at some of the events that you were also at, I know that this will not be the last time that we will have a conversation because the election itself, folks, will be in 2022. So that gives people a chance to be able to reach out, speak with you, ask you questions, and to find out more. And we'll be happy to be having you on this program again. We do want to mention that we are extending the invitation to be on this program to all of your opponents because that's what we do on this program. We give everyone the opportunity to have an interview and to be able to speak to the public.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll both be better talkers than I, because I am not a politician.
And what's the website again?
It is Tom for 52. That's TOMFOR. Sorry, TOMFOR52.com. Unlike most politicians, all of my policy, things we've discussed tonight and more, is on the website. You actually can read what I'm about. It is there, plain and simple. The only thing I'm really looking at addressing is the cannabis policy, because of the new legislation that's come through. My gun policy may include, again, because of new legislation. I have a policy team that we're working on that. But you know, if you want to stay up to date, you can put your email in. You can get when we do a press release to the press, you'll get it in your email. You don't have to rely on the press for it, because often enough, as I discovered last year, even though I was the only other person in the race, the press doesn't want to cover it. That was interesting. Actually, Spectrum News labeled me as a Democrat. And after I asked them to change it to Libertarian, you know what they did? They just removed Democrat and they didn't put Libertarian.
Yeah, that's odd. It
is. But I'm a Libertarian. I like community action. So, all my friends wrote into Spectrum News, and after that, Democrat was at least removed. I wish they'd put Libertarian in, though. People have. I want to make one last statement.
Sure.
If you have a preconception of libertarianism, shed it, throw it away, throw it in the garbage. Go meet some libertarians. Go to a county affiliate meeting. Come to the state committee meeting in Albany. I believe it's the 18th of July. You can find all this info on lpny.org. You can see our platform at lp.org. That's our national platform that states are relatively beholden to, although we can get a little more into the details of state issues, right? Because New York has issues that Alabama doesn't, and Alabama has issues that New York doesn't. And you can actually get involved. You can talk to us. You can talk to me personally by going to the website and submitting your information and requesting. And actually, soon I will be rolling out a calendar type app where you will be able to request an hour of my time, and I will give it to you.
That sounds interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that app. I'm not familiar with one of those. But
so there's Calendly, CALANDLY, something like that. That was nice and free. And then, of course, the tools I was talking about has a similar function.
Okay. Well, people now and this is a way to, again, get to speak to one of the candidates who is running and looking for your vote. I said
it last year, I'll say it now, and I'll keep saying it. I really do seek to be the most accessible candidate in the race, which is why I went to almost every single town and district during COVID.
That's impressive. That is impressive, because it was a difficult time last year. So running a campaign, it was no fun. First-hand knowledge, I know exactly how difficult that was.
It was difficult, but I don't like things to be easy. I'm happy when it's difficult. I want the challenge. I want to go do the thing.
Well, New York State is a challenge, so you got that. Folks, I want to thank you for joining us here. We've had an exclusive interview with Thomas Quitter, and he's the Libertarian candidate for the New York 52nd District, as he has announced, and you will be seeing probably side by side with this video being available to the public. We want to thank you for taking the time to learn more about your government, and we do invite you to look into the Libertarian Party if you find that of interest, or to contact Mr. Quitter. Excuse me. I know. That's the way it's spelled.
Yep, Thomas Daniel Quitter, never quitter, really quieter.
Oh, I like that. Okay. And folks, so I want to thank you for joining us, and we will be back with you very, very soon.